Hello and welcome to our webinar, Understanding Alzheimer's and Dementia. I'm Mike Bias with the Alzheimer's Association, and today we'll look at some of the normal signs of aging and contrast them with possible signs of Alzheimer's or other dementias. Now, before I introduce our guest today, I'd like to point out a few things on your screen so that you can get the most out of today's webinar. Directly under our webcams is the Program Notes pod, where, if you're joining us live, you can click to download the participant manual. That'll help you get the most from this program. If you're viewing this as a recording, you can download that at alzwebinars.org. Now, to the left of that, all the way in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, is what's called the Q&A pod. And that's where you can type in your questions anonymously for our presenter today, which we will answer toward the end of our hour together. So just to see if everybody is on board, why don't you go ahead and type into the Q&A pod, just type in your zip code. Again, anything you type in there is anonymous, only I can see that. And I see that we've got people anywhere from Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Kentucky, Tennessee, California, and all points in between. Great. I see that that is working. All righty. Well, and now you know how to ask a question. Again, if you ask a question, no one else will see your question. It'll be anonymous, and Scott will answer that toward the end of our time together. At the top of your screen, there's a little icon that looks like this where you can raise your hand, but we don't really use that. So if you do need something, go ahead and type it into the Q&A pod. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker. Scott McClure is a PhD, an ordained pastor, and an 11-year veteran of the United States Air Force. He's also joining us today in his capacity as a community educator for the Alzheimer's Association.
I'm well, Mike. Thank you. How are you?
Welcome, Scott. How are you? I'm doing great, and I'm going to do what I do best. I'm going to
All right, thanks, Mike. Well, today we're going to take a look at some of the Alzheimer's and dementia to give you kind of a broad understanding of really what you're in for today. By the end of today, your goal, we'll be able to understand really what Alzheimer's dementia is, recognize how Alzheimer's and disease affects the brain, list some of the risk factors of Alzheimer's, as well as identify 3 stages of the disease, recognize any of the FDA-approved treatments that can address some of the symptoms of the disease, and describe how scientists are working to advance research. So let's go ahead and get started. Hope everybody's having a great day. So like I said, we're going to cover these topics. And so we're going to talk about the impact of Alzheimer's in our society. Well, we know that Alzheimer's is really a global crisis, and likely that you are hearing about it. We probably hear more about it in our daily lives now. Probably you've heard of somebody that has it, or you know yourself that has Alzheimer's. Let's start off by saying how much you know about the impact of Alzheimer's in the United States. So we're going to test your knowledge. You probably didn't realize we're going to have a quiz today, so we're going to go ahead and do that anyhow. So what do you think about this one? How many Americans are currently living with Alzheimer's? If you think you may know the answer, you can probably put that down in the Q&A in the bottom there. So your choices are 8,500,000, 5.7 million, 12 million, or 3.4 million. So what do you think? Drum roll, here we go. And the answer is 5.7 million. Barring any developments in prevention of treatments methods, this number is projected to reach about 14 million by 2050. That's pretty an astounding number. Currently, an estimated 50 million people worldwide are living with dementia. You ready for another question? Here we go. How many unpaid Alzheimer's caregivers are there in the United States? Again, how many unpaid Alzheimer's caregivers are here in the United States? 1.2 million, 8.5 million, 13 million, or 16.1 million. So currently, that's right, 16.1. We have 16.1 million Americans are providing unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's or other dementia. Alzheimer's impacts caregivers both at home and at work, and more than about 80% of our caregivers report of having to go in late, take time off, even quit altogether due to the caring demands that's placed on them. These caregivers approximately provide about 18.4 billion hours of care last year, and that's valued at about $232 billion. That's B. That's right. As you can see, this disease takes a personal impact, really, not only on the individual facing, but as well as our loved ones as well. So here we about know the facts. So um, let's go ahead and look at some of the statistics that we have. What do you think about that? What about those statistics? Is there anything surprising to you? If you'd like to learn more about some of those statistics that you saw, you can also visit alz.org facts. So that's pretty interesting facts. Let's go ahead and start our next module, which is really understanding Alzheimer's and dementia. You know, as you may hear, the terms Alzheimer's, dementia used interchangeably. They're related, but a little bit different. In this next session, we're going to really kind of discuss both Alzheimer's and dementia and how they are related. So let's go ahead and test your knowledge once again. Again, you probably didn't realize you have a quiz today, so let's go ahead and do this next question. Alzheimer is a normal part of the aging process. This one's actually going to be a 50-50. What do you think, true or false? That's right, Alzheimer is not a part of the aging process. Alzheimer's is a brain disease that causes problems with memory, thinking, and behavior, and is not a part of the aging process. So, raise your hand. If you can probably put that in the bottom there. So raise your hand if you think this is true. But a lot of people get this wrong because Alzheimer's is a little bit more than memory loss. It's really progressive and fatal disease that kills nerve cells and tissues in the brain by affecting the individual's ability to remember, think, plan, ultimately function. So that's one of those things that you really kind of have to look at. So let's go ahead and take another one. Take a gander at this one. People younger than age 65 can get Alzheimer's. What do you think here? Is that true or false? All right, I'm seeing some true. I'm seeing some false. All right, and here we go. Approximately 200 million or 200,000 Americans rather under the age of 65 are living with the youngest onset Alzheimer. In some cases, individuals develop the disease in their 40s or 50s. So that is true. So you do have that. So there's a video that we're going to show here with Dr. Heather Schneider. She's going to explain how Alzheimer's and dementia are related. So here we go.
Dementia is the umbrella term for an individual's changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. There are many possible causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Other causes of dementia are vascular dementia, which is marked by changes in the blood flow in the blood vessels in the brain. Dementia with Lewy bodies, identified by specific brain changes throughout the brain that include the buildup of a protein known as alpha-synuclein. And frontal temporal dementia, which is marked by brain cell loss in the front sections of the brain or the frontal lobe. Each type of dementia may have distinct characteristics to cause specific behaviors in the individual, but there is also some overlap in behaviors among the types of dementia.
The dementia, sometimes medications could do that. As you get older, sometimes it's harder to metabolize your medications, so that may look like a form of dementia. Urinary tract infections can also mask something that may look like dementia, but you may want to check with your doctor first. That's why it's important to really kind of understand what we're going for here. So about 60 to 80% of all dementia cases are caused by Alzheimer's, so that's why there's such a big emphasis on this. And there are a number of types of dementia, as we talked about. Each one has a different cause. That's why it's important to really understand what they are, so you can understand what you're up against. Does this help explain how Alzheimer's and dementia are related? Does anybody really understand how this is? Well, yeah, I think if you have issues with your memory or the cognitive aspect of what you're going through, that's why it's important to talk to your loved ones and let your doctors know there's something going on, that you can catch this a little bit earlier. Sometimes I get questions too about what is mild cognitive impairment. Well, mild cognitive impairment is changes that are serious enough to really reduce an individual's experiencing daily activities or change in their independent function on a daily basis. So that's why you want to get this checked out as soon as you can. So there's also those things that you also hear this misconception that the only way to really identify somebody with dementia can't be fully identified until you have an autopsy. That's not always the case. While there's no single test to determine if somebody has dementia, your doctor may take multiple steps to determine the cause of memory and thinking problems. So that's why it's important for them to take a lot of different tests. It may be important for you to maybe contact a neurologist to understand what else is going on, and also looking at your medication list, and also making sure that, and I did this in another class where we talked about, you want to make sure that if you go to a pharmacy, make sure you go to the same pharmacy over again. Don't go to different pharmacies because not all pharmacies talk together. So CVS is not going to talk to Walgreens and vice versa. Same way with the Walmart may not talk to a smaller rural pharmacy. So you want to make sure that you take the appropriate steps to make sure that you let your healthcare providers know if you're on any kind of supplements or any kind of medication that may mask a form of dementia or even maybe exacerbate certain parts of your health. So let's go ahead and hear from the experts. We're going to introduce this particular partner here, someone who is living with dementia, specifically Lewy bodies.
Certainly having the diagnosis of Lewy body was helpful in our planning because we began to understand where this was coming from in the brain, where otherwise we would not have known. Like we knew something was happening, but what was it? To give it a label actually helped, although it was a big umbrella. It explains some of the characteristics and symptoms that we were experiencing and seeing.
Some of the benefits of early diagnosis is really important if you think about it. So an accurate diagnosis, early diagnosis allows an individual to maybe seek additional medical opinions or the advice of a specialist, as I talked about, going to neurologists, better medical care. Individuals who understand their diagnosis are a little bit more active participants in the decision-making process, especially early on as we get to the the three stages of Alzheimer's itself. You have those decision making. So you have a part of that decision making process. So when it becomes a chore or become unresponsive or to the point where you're nonverbal, you have an understanding of what to do next as far as a caregiver and what you can expect as a person that has dementia. Understanding the changes, people experience memory loss are often aware that something is not right, but knowing the diagnosis can also help you and them understand symptoms they have felt or observed may be something else going on. Like I talked about, it could be a medical condition. So there's a lot of different things that you can do when it comes to early diagnosis. So it's important not to assume that it's because of old age. We talked about it's not because of that. It's a lot of different things going on. So you want to make sure that you get it checked out before it becomes to the point where you're not understanding what's going on and you are getting frustrated because nobody understands what's going on. So it's important that you understand yourself as well as a caregiver what to do. So the dementia and Alzheimer recap here is really dementia's general form of a collection of different symptoms that are severe enough to really interfere with your daily life. Alzheimer is most common cause of dementia. And then Alzheimer's is not normal part of aging. It's progressive brain disease. Some of the things I do hear more frequently than anything else is I hear mom or dad or grandpa or grandma was driving and they were at a stop sign and they forgot where they were. That is something that does definitely interfere with your daily life. So just bear that in mind as we move forward, that you kind of put these thoughts together. So when you have part of this, these things going on, you understand what to do and how to really kind of combat that. So to discuss, Alzheimer's is really kind of a brain disease. The brain is our most complex organ, as you know. It's also the most powerful, despite weighing only about 3 pounds. So let's go ahead and hear from one of our experts about how Alzheimer's really affects the brain.
More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alice Alzheimer's described specific changes in the brain, what we call the formation of plaques and tangles. Now, Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that's marked by these key changes and is thought to impact memory, thinking, and behavior. The brain has three main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each one plays a role in how the body functions. The cerebrum fills up most of your skull. It is part of the brain most involved in remembering, problem-solving, thinking, and even feelings. There are about 100 billion nerve cells, or neurons, throughout the brain that transmit messages in order for us to create memories, feelings, and thoughts. Alzheimer's disease causes nerve cells to die, which leads to the brain tissue loss, or what we call shrinkage, and causes loss of function and communication between cells. These changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, such as memory loss, problems with thinking, planning, behavioral issues, and even at the end stages, problems with swallowing.
The doctor was talking about here, developing those tau tangles. So a lot of the questions I get are, what are these plaques and these tangles that he's talked about? Well, plaque is really that abnormal cluster of protein fragments that build up between the nerve cells. And what happens is those nerve cells are not able to really have those synapse gaps actually firing those sensories telling the brain, hey, you need to start doing something. So scientists really aren't absolutely sure what is causing the cell death and tissue loss in Alzheimer's brain, but plaques and tangles are really seem to be the prime suspect here. So let's go ahead and hear from one of our experts again. We're going to hear a little bit more about how this works, and we'll see what she has to talk about as far as risk factors.
Alzheimer's disease is marked by specific brain changes that result in the clinical changes in individual experiences. That is, changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. And ultimately, Alzheimer's is fatal. The exact cause for these changes is unknown, but there are some hints as to what may contribute to an individual's risk. Age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's, and when we look at populations of people, we see an increased risk over the age of 65. However, Alzheimer's is not normal aging. Family history is also a known risk factor. Research has shown that those who have a parent or a sibling with Alzheimer's are more likely to develop the disease, and that risk increases if more than one family member has Alzheimer's. When we talk about the genes involved in Alzheimer's, there are two categories that could potentially be involved: risk genes and deterministic genes. Risk genes increases an individual's risk for developing the disease, but does not guarantee that they will develop Alzheimer's. Deterministic genes, which are rare for Alzheimer's, guarantee that the person will develop the disease.
So as stated before here, we talked that more than 100 years ago, Dr. Alzheimer's really described specific changes in the brain, the formation of plaques, as we talked about in those tangles. Alzheimer's caused nerve cells to die, which leads to the brain to shrink. And that's why you have such a profound change of behavior. You also have some of those memory losses. You have people that normally were nice and pleasant are no longer nice and pleasant. The brain changes as a result in the shrinkage. So you do have the problem with the memory, thinking, and behavior as well. So risk factors is one of the things we talk about. So we're going to kind of test your knowledge again here, and we know everybody is at risk for developing any form of dementia. There are a few known factors to increase a person's risk for developing this. So we're going to test your knowledge here again, and we'll find out how you do. So which is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's disease? Do you think it's genetic, family history, or age? So let's go genetics. Okay. Well, if you put genetics down, you're wrong. That's false. How about family history? Family history is false. As you guessed it, it's actually going to be age. That's right. As mentioned, these are all known risk factors. However, age is the greatest known risk factor for that. So it's not a part of the normal aging process. Age is a risk factor. After the age of 65, the risk for Alzheimer's doubles every 5 years. 32% of people the age of 85 or older have Alzheimer's. So it's kind of astounding. So if you think of somebody who's over the age of 65, but specifically over the age of 85, the chance of having Alzheimer's is pretty great. So let's go ahead and hear from the experts again. We're going to go through this again. She's going to talk about it's not really the normal process of aging, but we do know it's the greatest known for risk factor.
One of the things that impacts our brain is all the other things that can happen to us as we age. And we know that Alzheimer's, the most common risk factor for getting Alzheimer's disease is age. But we also have lots of other things that go wrong with us as we age. And so how those other health factors impact our brain can also impact how Alzheimer's presents in other people.
It's a different kind of forgetting. It really, really is. It's not just forgetting where I put my car keys. It's much deeper than that. And for example, I cannot read a book. I used to be a voracious reader because by the time I turn a page, I have forgotten what I had read. And if you're reading a novel, you have to know what transpired before in order for you to continue to read on. And so I can't read a novel, so I've even stopped trying.
Math, I can't do a simple tip anymore. You know, I sit there, I stare at it. It's crazy what numbers I can't deal with anymore. And in some ways, that's the disease to me. The other thing that I've increasingly been struggling with are words, which I've dealt with words my entire life, you know, as an avid reader, as a reporter, as a writer. I struggle with them now.
I'm like an overachiever, and when you're unable to deliver or you're not performing at the same pace that you once did before, that's frustrating. It's frustrating to not know where you place things. It's frustrating to not be able to explain to someone the problems that you're having. You can't articulate it in a way. It's frustrating to read something and you forgot what you read. It's frustrating to continuously have to change your password and you just changed it last week and you're constantly doing the same thing over and over again.
I think the thing that surprises me the most about my dementia is that it is progressive. And I'm finding that I'm forgetting more. And they do memory tests for me all the time at the doctor's. And so that becomes a little disconcerting at times to see my cognitive impairment continue to decline. But again, I really have hope. I don't live really in the future. I can't live in the future. I can't worry about what the future is going to bring. I have to live for today.
I think one of the things you also keep in mind too, on average, a person with Alzheimer's lives 4 to 8 years after diagnosis, but can live as long as 20, and it really depends on other risk factors. So think about that as we go through this, and keep in mind too that veterans will have a higher grade or a greater chance of developing Alzheimer's too. So there's other things going here. So, but as mentioned, it's important to remember that the stages of Alzheimer's are general, and because each person lives with this disease, has unique experiences, we can't always nicely place them in specific stages or categories. Matter of fact, Some people may exhibit symptoms that overlap other stages as well. The stages do allow you to gain a general understanding of the progression of the disease, but as Alzheimer's progresses, the individual behaviors will change, as does the role of the caregiver. So bear that in mind as a caregiver. You need to understand what's going on with your loved one that has the dementia. These stages can help caregivers really prepare for what to expect and understand and how to best respond. So, we talk about the population as a higher risk. Hispanics are about 1.5 times as likely as whites to develop Alzheimer's and other dementias. African Americans are about twice as likely to develop the disease as whites, and almost 2/3 of Americans with Alzheimer's are women. So that's pretty remarkable. And again, that's because women outlive guys. That's the thing about guys. We have a tendency to do, here, hold my beer, watch this. But no, women do actually outlive guys. So that's the reason why. Longevity and lower death rates can also partially explain this difference. Research is also exploring how genetic differences between men and women impact the disease risk itself. So, so there's some other things involved with that, but this kind of gives you an oversight or an overview about the population at risk. So the risk factor recap that we had talked about is really age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's. An individual risk for developing the disease increases at the age of 65. Family history, also known as risk factor, having a parent or sibling with the disease does increase the individual's risk factor, but it's not a guarantee that you're going to get it. It's just a risk factor. Risk genes and deterministic genes are the two types of genes associated with Alzheimer's. Hispanics, African American, and women are an increased risk for Alzheimer's, and I do want to add that veterans as well has a higher risk for Alzheimer's as well. So we're going to talk about the stages of Alzheimer's disease, and we mentioned earlier that it's important to remember that these stages of Alzheimer's are general, and because each person really is different with the disease.
Alzheimer's affects everyone differently. Alzheimer's affects everyone differently. As a result, it's difficult to place a person in a specific stage of the disease. However, there are 3 general stages that are commonly referred to as early, middle, and late stage Alzheimer's. In a medical context, you may hear these stages referred to as mild, moderate, and severe. In the early stage of Alzheimer's, an individual may be able to function independently. However, they may start noticing more frequent memory lapses. Friends and family may also begin to notice difficulties in the person, and a healthcare provider may be able to detect problems in memory or concentration by conducting a detailed medical interview. Middle stage Alzheimer's is typically the longest stage and can last for many years. Damage to the brain cells can make it difficult to express thoughts and perform routine tasks, and this can lead to increased feelings of frustration and anger. In the final stage of the disease, an individual loses the ability to hold a conversation, control their movements, or respond to the environment around them. Cognitive skills, that is, their memory, thinking, and reasoning skills, continue to decline, and this can lead to personality changes and need for round-the-clock care.
Between a caregiver and really a care partner. Well, care partner is a term that many prefer over caregiver. While the individual with Alzheimer in the early stages, when he or she may not need much assistance with daily tasks, but still needs benefits from support of family and friends. So bear that in mind as well. Also going back to the different stages, it's important to understand as they progress, as we said before, it's not all going to be the same. Everybody progresses differently in this particular disease. So those 3 stages that we really had talked about, as mentioned earlier, that Dr. Schneider talked about, was the 3 stages of Alzheimer's disease, the early, middle, and late, really are sometimes referred to as mild, moderate, severe in medical context. And it's important to understand why you need to get checked out early, especially in the early to onset and middle, is having some kind of plan in place for family, caregivers, care partners, that when a person does get to the point of that late onset of dementia, you have a plan in place. Do you want me to help you with questions or some of the thoughts that you're struggling with? You want me to help you with that? Give you 5 minutes. How do you want me to proceed when it gets to the point where you become unable to communicate? So these are very important when it comes to those decision-making processes, especially early to middle stages. That way you have a plan, and that way the person that has the dementia also has a say-so in what's going on in their health. So no two individuals experience the symptoms and progression of Alzheimer's disease in the same way. While symptoms do worsen over time, people progress through these stages at different rates as their abilities change as well. So there's a lot of different things with this, and the thing about these webinars or any type of programs that you go to, it's just a great educational tool. So there's so much to the tip of this iceberg that you really kind of need to educate yourself as you experience this on your own, or even in the past, because it does change as the person changes. So just bear that in mind, that this information is good starting stepping stone, and it's a good way to kind of start that foundation. So we talk about some of the approved symptoms for FDA approved treatments for these symptoms of Alzheimer's. So we're going to be talking about some of the ideas that you see on TV. So we start seeing what you already know about some of the treatments available in Alzheimer's. There's several drugs available to slow down the progression of Alzheimer's disease. By a show of hands, or even on the Q&A pod here, how many of you think that this is true, that there's several drugs available to slow down the progression of Alzheimer's disease? Okay, we're getting a couple of the trues and the false. It is kind of a 50-50. All right. So the question is, there are several drugs available to slow down the progression of Alzheimer's disease. Well, to kind of put it in a nutshell, and not to hurt anybody's feelings, it's actually false. There are currently no treatments to prevent, treat, or slow down Alzheimer's disease. However, that being said, several drugs are available to address some of the symptoms. So that's why it's important to understand that there is no cure for Alzheimer's, but there are current drugs out there that will address some of these symptoms. So let's hear from Dr. Hendricks about some of these medications.
There are currently several drugs that are FDA approved. There are currently several drugs that are FDA approved to treat the cognitive symptoms associated with Alzheimer's disease. They treat the symptoms, but they don't treat the underlying cause. So eventually people will progress, but they do treat some of the symptoms and help people for a time. So the first class of drugs are cholinesterase inhibitors. These drugs work to prevent the breakdown of acetylcholine, which is a chemical messenger found in the brain that's associated with learning and memory. There are 3 FDA-approved drugs that are in this class of drugs. There's Aricept, there's Exelon, and there's Razidine. There's another class of drugs that modulates glutamate, which is another chemical messenger in the brain that's associated with learning and memory. And this drug is called Namenda. And then there's a final class, which is actually a combination of cholinesterase inhibitors and glutamate modulator, and this is called Namzaric.
So it's important to understand what Dr. Hendricks said, that these treatments can help relieve some of the symptoms with people for a time. And because everybody experiences Alzheimer's differently, these treatments work in varying degrees and are not effective for everybody. So just bear that in mind as well. An accurate diagnosis is really important to ensure that the proper treatment is prescribed. Sometimes drug misuse may lead to negative side effects. And also, too, as we get older, our bodies aren't able to metabolize certain medications. So you may have those bouts or spells like you do have dementia. So that's why it's important to check these things out early and make sure that you get that accurate diagnosis. Some of the things that I hear too is, why am I on 2 or more different drugs? Well, I can't really speak to certain doctors and why they prescribe what they have prescribed, but if you have concerns or questions about why you are on certain medications, I would encourage you to bring this up with your doctor when you have that opportunity. Another thing to keep in mind, as we get older, we have a tendency to see different specialists, whether it be your heart doctor, your kidney doctor, your family practice doctor, your joint doctor. Make sure that you take with you a medication list, because although they're doctors, they don't necessarily talk to each other. So keep that in mind and keep those lists handy for you. And those should be updated about every month, and you should have about 4 copies of those to have and update those as you go, because sometimes drug-to-drug interaction is a big thing and it's a big deal. So FDA-approved treatments, recap, there are 3 types of drugs that are approved by the FDA to help manage Alzheimer's symptoms. As we said before, there is no cure out there. There's nothing there to slow down the disease itself. So keep that in mind. Not every drug is for everybody. Aricept, Exelon are some of the ones that are out there. You also have a combination of drugs, so find out from your doctor what's going to be appropriate for you. And these treatments only address some of those symptoms we talk about. In some people's cases, they do not really treat the underlying cause of the disease itself. So advancing Alzheimer's research is really important, and to understand, what we need to do next. In the last decade, we found that researchers have made enormous strides really in understanding how Alzheimer's disease affects the brain. Many recent insights point towards promising new strategies for treatment, prevention, and diagnosis. So we're going to see how some of these are, and there's a lot of hope out there. And to keep that in mind when we listen to what's going on, there's a lot of hope out there for what's going on.
This is an incredibly exciting time in Alzheimer's and dementia research. The advancements that we've made in the last decade to understand the disease as a continuum, meaning that the biological changes are starting a decade or more before someone is experiencing the changes in the memory and thinking. This sets the stage for possible prevention. The idea that when we have the tools to identify those individuals at the earliest time point, and when we have the interventions to target individuals at that earliest time point, we can intervene to stop or slow the progression of the disease before an individual loses their memories.
I'm excited about what we're learning these days regarding lifestyle. One of those things that we've seen in the past of things like exercise and nutrition have now started to gain more momentum to indicate to us that it can change your ability to slow cognitive decline. That is really the first stages of Alzheimer's disease. This may include things like social engagement, mental cognitive training. It can be things such as exercise. It can be nutrition. All those things are now starting to point that they will lower your risk for Alzheimer's disease.
A lot of hope does come from the Alzheimer's Association, all the research that is being done. Even though there is not a cure today for the disease, I know in my heart there is going to be a cure one day. And I know we're getting closer for that cure. Because even if you fail in a research study, you learn from that failure in the research study. That failure always brings progression.
It's nice to see the association spearheading in many ways the emphasis on getting the money at the federal level and at the private sector to get the research done so that someday there will be an effective treatment, hopefully cure, hopefully prevention.
By these individuals, there's a lot of excitement there. There's a lot of hope for what we're headed for with Alzheimer's research. One of the key ways to really keep research moving in the right direction is through clinical studies. It's important to understand what scientists are looking for. There's new ways to treat Alzheimer's in these studies, and there are many drugs currently in the research pipeline. So keep that in mind when you hear things that are on the pipeline or the market. Recruiting and retaining trial participants is the greatest obstacle now, other than funding, to develop really the next generation of Alzheimer's treatments. So we'll hear from Dr. Fargo and Hendricks about the importance of these clinical studies for the future of Alzheimer's treatment. So keep that in mind as we talk about these clinical studies to advancing Alzheimer's research.
more important than ever for people to participate in clinical studies. The fact is, right now, we don't have an effective treatment to stop Alzheimer's disease. And if we don't have people participating in clinical trials, we never will. And so participating in a clinical study is one way that everyone can get involved in a very direct way in the fight against Alzheimer's disease. And for people who currently have dementia or Alzheimer's disease, there are some additional benefits. You get access to very close medical care. You also may be among the first people to have access to the treatments that will eventually prove to work.
Sometimes you hear the phrase, it's a failed trial. That means that it didn't hit the endpoint, it didn't achieve an FDA-approved drug. But I would say as a scientist, the only failed trial is one that doesn't give you valuable information. And if the trial is well designed, if it is a good scientific experiment, you get extremely valuable data so that you can plan the next trial and do the next study even better than the last one. And it gets you that much closer to that FDA-approved drug, to that effective treatment, and maybe someday even a cure.
Currently, more than 5 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's. By participating in clinical research, you can move us toward methods of treatment and prevention for all those affected by this devastating disease. Alzheimer's Association Trial Match is a free clinical studies matching service for those with dementia, caregivers, and healthy volunteers. To start, simply create a confidential user profile and receive a list of studies that may be a match for you. Don't just hope for a cure, help us find one.
Note too, as we heard from the doctors, everybody can really help in advance of Alzheimer's research. It's really especially critical for people of diverse backgrounds to participate in clinical research, really because they are at an increased risk for developing the disease. And it's important that researchers are able to study large populations of these individuals to better understand the disease and their elevated vulnerability. So let's look at some of the association services that can help with people find these studies. But I also want to ask too, some of the things that we do see is we get questions about the difference between clinical study, clinical trials. Well, these terms are often used interchangeably, but there are subtle differences that kind of point out. Clinical trials really test new interventions or drugs to prevent, detect, treat the disease. A clinical study is any type of clinical research involving people, really regardless of whether it's a testing a specific intervention. Clinical trials can also look at other aspects of care, such as improving quality of life. So I also get to, when we talk about trials, in addition to the trial match comment that was made, somebody says, I really don't want to sign up because I don't want my information shared with third parties. Understand that's very common these days where people get their information stolen or hacked. However, Trial Match does not share your information with all listed studies. It's your choice to really connect. All the information remains confidential. So it's up to you who you want to share your information with and why. So that's very important to understand that. But it's also important to understand why it means to be a healthy volunteer. By this we mean healthy people who do not have dementia. So to understand what good looks like, you need to see what healthy looks like as well. So scientists have increased their understanding of what Alzheimer's is significantly over the past year. People living with dementia, caregivers, healthy volunteers without dementia are needed for clinical trials, as I mentioned, in order to find methods of prevention, treatment, and ultimately cure. Both drug and non-drug studies are taking place around the country and online. And Trial Match that we talked about, alz.org /trial match, is one of these free clinical study matching services that you can be a part of. I also want to point out, too, that you need to make sure, too, when you're talking about drug and non-drug studies, but going back to when you're taking medication, let your doctors know, too, if you're taking any over-the-counter or herbal remedies, well, because sometimes those may also counteract the drugs that you are taking currently for whatever disease that you may have as well. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the Alzheimer's Association. So the Alzheimer's Association mission is actually very simple. The mission is to leading volunteer health organization in Alzheimer's care support and research. The mission is really to eliminate Alzheimer's disease through the advancement of research, to really provide and enhance care and support for all affected, and to reduce the risk of dementia through the promotion of brain health. Our vision is a worldwide, is a world really without Alzheimer's altogether. There's a couple of, you'll see here, and I'll mention that as we go through here, that the Alzheimer's Association is a community that's really kind of across the country providing these direct services really for individuals that are facing the disease and those families that are helping those individuals. And the vision worldwide is something that we want to stress, but also too that numbers that are on the screen that you see through here, I would jot them down. I would even jot down the addresses to any of these websites that we have, because one of the things you'll find out is we have some resources out there. On the helpline is 24/7, 800-272-3900. Online, you'll see the alz.org, and in communities nationwide, alz.org/CRF. So,
I've had a couple of phone calls that I've been able to make in to the call center. When I've had a couple of quick questions that I wanted to ask, there's been a couple of nights, 2 o'clock in the morning, you have questions, you have anxieties, and I was struggling dealing with them, and it's amazing. It was one of the best things I ever did, was keeping the call center on my favorites now. Just to know that there's somebody you can call who is aware of what you're going through.
When I went to the Alzheimer's Association website, which is alz.org, there I was trying to find out more about what was Alzheimer's, what really is this disease, what is younger onset Alzheimer's, what is dementia, is there a cure, how long has this been around, how many people are affected by this, where can I go for resources, where can I go for help, what do I do with this? How can I handle this? Is there more people like me out there? Is there someone that I can talk to if I need to? And there I found the support line that's 24 hours a day. And there I found where I can go for workshops, where I can go and read things and postings that people have done, where I can find out what events is happening in the Alzheimer's Association, where I can see how it's affecting people around the globe.
Since I've been diagnosed with dementia, the one place that I know I can go to for assistance and help and support is to the Alzheimer's Association. There are people there that I know by name that I can contact if I'm having a difficult time or if I'm struggling to find some resource, that they will provide that to me.
The association is available really wherever, whenever you need that support, reliable information and support. Those are the key resources that you can contact anybody, especially the 24/7 helpline. You can call them at 800-272-3900 anytime, day or night. You can receive that information and support. You will get master level clinicians who are available around the clock to really provide any in-depth care consultation, free of charge, care navigation services offered to families at any stage. And they also help available at 200 different languages. So that's very nice to have. As we heard about Tom, Teresa, and Tim about their experiences, it's nice to be able to have that helpline. And I've actually used it a few times myself. So jot that down if you can, because it's very important to kind of have that as a nice resource. So some of the things we do get is, do I have to pay for these services or resources? Well, no. Really, the association offers numerous educational programs, support groups, and other resources really free of charge. So you don't have to worry about paying for this, and it's really a wealth of information for you. So again, we have the Alzheimer's Association number, 800-272-3900, alz.org for any types of questions that you have. and it's imperative that you kind of investigate in your own community if you're not in my community to find out where the best way to find a resource for you or your local chapter is to maybe Google that, or you can even call or even visit alz.org/CRF to kind of get some information, or you can call the 800 number again. So that kind of concludes my particular part of the presentation. I hope that you enjoyed the presentation, and I hope that you gathered at least something that you could take away either to implement or to kind of research on your own.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Scott. We do have some questions. The first one is a question that we hear all the time, and that is, I've heard that turmeric and or coconut oil helps with Alzheimer's. Can it reverse or stop or slow Alzheimer's disease?
That's actually a good question. We get that too. Really, the claim is based on the theory that neurons, those nerve cells, the synapse gaps are closing, so they're not able to communicate in the brain of people with Alzheimer's disease. So they're unable to use the glucose or that sugar to really produce that energy that's needed. The theory is that coconut oil may actually act as an alternative energy source. However, there's not enough scientific evidence to really suggest that it's an effective treatment for Alzheimer's.
Yes, and as Scott mentioned, if you do decide that you want to give it a try, you might say nothing ventured, nothing gained, but you do want to check with your physician or your pharmacist, because anything, even if you're on blood thinners and you're eating too many green leafy vegetables, there can be reactions to your medications that are interactions that you might not be aware of. So before you do anything, make sure that you talk to your doctor or your pharmacist. Last week, there was a new drug, aducanumab. Biogen is going to be is the pharmaceutical company that's going to be asking for FDA approval. There seems to be some promise there, but even that is not to prevent or cure Alzheimer's. It's thought to be helpful with some of the decline in cognition. So we're still not where we want to be as far as treatment, but we can get there. It's just going to take us redoubling our efforts. Okay. Another question is support groups. If my family member has Alzheimer's, how do I know if I need to be into a support group?
That's a really good question. It's actually a common question. Some communities do have support groups. Some have support groups through churches, through even small hospital outlets, or even some of their communities, whether it be in the library. So I encourage anybody that may have some issues, whether they think they have some form of dementia, or if they're a caregiver or care partner of somebody, to really kind of research to find out where their local organizations are. I would caution, though, that not all organizations that say they're a support group may be vetted through the Alzheimer's Association, but you can get started through the Alzheimer's Association to really kind of get an idea of where you can find some of these particular support groups. But I encourage people to get support groups because these people have done it, they've actually experienced this, and they may be able to help other people that are that have traveled down that road to really kind of get an idea of where to go next. I think that's probably important.
Yes, and there's an online support community called alzconnected.org. And if you call our helpline, they can tell you about that as well. So there's a lot of resources available. And the easiest way to access everything is the 24/7 nationwide helpline. Scott, there was a follow-up question about turmeric. I don't know, some people say turmeric, some other people say turmeric, but will it help? And the answer is we just don't know. It has not been proven in clinical studies, and until something is proven in a clinical study, the Alzheimer's Association is not going to go out on a limb and say, here's your hope.
Right.
A lot of people point to the fact that there seems to be a lower incidence of Alzheimer's disease in India, and turmeric is part of curry. And the problem is, number one, we don't know, is the reporting better or worse in India? They might have the same amount of Alzheimer's, but the reporting into the physicians isn't as good. The other thing is, if turmeric is good at preventing Alzheimer's, which we don't know yet, how much and how long do you have to take it? If this is part of a lifelong diet in India, then taking capsules when you're 55 years old might not be enough. So there's just too many questions right now, and we just, we can't really answer that. So you can talk to your physician, but as of right now, it's not been proven.
Right. And I kind of go back on what you said earlier too, Mike. Talk to your physician about this. Talk to your healthcare provider because that may be something that kind of may contraindicate some of the drugs that you are taking. Additionally, you're talking about leafy vegetables and all that. One of the biggest things that I do see, especially with older population, is to avoid grapefruits. That's another thing because of the way certain medications are metabolized in the cytochrome P450 system. So you want to make sure that you're staying above that and that you're not taking something that may counteract some of the information that you're getting on a package label that you have.
Right. Well, that is about all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank you all for logging in. Scott, I'd like to thank you especially for sharing your time and expertise with us.
Thank you very much, Mike.
So I hope that you'll go to alzwebinars.org and sign up for a future webinar. And you can also view this webinar, if you're joining us live, as a recording at alzwebinars.org in about 48 hours. All of our webinars are posted as recordings. So with that, we hope to see you again soon, and have a great day.